growing up with no money is actually better than growing up with money.
Jack Henderson is a leading real estate entrepreneur, keynote speaker, and thought leader who has built a personal property portfolio worth over $40 million. He's the founder of Henderson Advocacy, Endeavour Build, and Henderson Development, which together has generated $25 million in annual revenue.
I don't think this cost of living crisis, or whatever it's being coined as, is as bad as people say. I truly believe that if you are not a wealthy person, Sydney is not a great place to live.
Jack continues to educate and inspire Australians through his direct and insightful social media content.
What's your advice to someone in that situation? How can they start to play the game?
I would say, hi, Mr. and Mrs. You can't afford to live in Sydney. There's a few pieces, I believe, to wealth creation. The first thing is,
you've called the cost of living crisis a spending crisis. What's your thoughts on this, and unpack exactly what you mean by that? I would like to welcome Jack Henderson to the Agency Podcast, brought to you by Wick Studios.
Thank you for having me. Mate, in the fancy new studio, first episode I hear.
Yes, that's it. And it's not radically different for the viewers at home, but for us, it's fantastic. The old studio was in the middle of our office, so if someone was making the loudest coffee in the world, we would have to pause and then edit it out.
Which people in agency world have a habit of doing.
Yeah, or they come out from a call and high five and scream and holler. And so this is nice. It's out of the way. It's quiet, secluded.
Honored to be the first one in the new studio.
Yeah, welcome, man. And dude, you've been busy. So you've just, as I understand, you were explaining you did an ultra marathon. You were inspired by Goggins himself.
The great man.
So yeah, what was that experience like for you, dude?
Yeah, it was my first 200-mile race. I've done 100-milers and lots of 100Ks and all the rest of it. But it was a different beast. 330 Ks, just over 8,000 meters of elevation. 72 hours of just in the darkness. But
Yeah,
it was
dodging
good.
snakes.
It was good. It was
Yeah.
good. Got fifth overall, but learnt a lot about myself, and you come out a better person after doing shit like that. So, yeah, man. On to the next challenge now. My feet look pretty banged up. I'm missing a toenail, a few blisters that are recovering, but all in all,
Yeah, man. The scars of war.
scars of war. Exactly. No, it was good fun though.
So, dude, you've been popping up a lot throughout media across the board. I understand across a lot of different channels here in Australia. You're definitely hot off the press and people are getting their feathers ruffled. But I always like to see that. I like it when people challenge the status quo, have an alternative take. And even if it just gets people to think differently, man, it's important to do that.
Yeah.
Now, you've called the cost of living crisis a spending crisis, and that people are lying to themselves potentially. What's your thoughts on this, and unpack exactly what you mean by that?
Look, I think regardless of the economy, there's people who are doing really, really well in all economies, and there's people who are doing really bad in all economies. So I don't think this cost of living crisis, or whatever it's being coined as, is as bad as people say. Like, there's no doubt about it that things are more expensive than what they were 5 years ago. Like, that's just fact. But the 5 years previous to that, we had next to no inflation. It was a very flat inflationary period. Hence the reason rates decreased like they did, because as rates decrease, they're trying to stimulate our economy, which drives growth. So if you look at the long-term average, we are no different to any other time. It's just that in a short period of time, things have gotten more expensive relative than what they maybe did for the 5 years previous. But people just have this habit of like looking at everything through a microscope and going, oh, well, fuel was X amount of dollars last year and now it's this. Or, you know, my rent's gone up by $150, but they neglect the fact that previous to that, and I did a video on this recently on my socials where I used one of my own properties as the example. And it was a property that I bought back in 2016. So the second property that I ever purchased. When I purchased it, it was rented for $700 a week. Between when I purchased it and now, it went from $700 down to $600 or $650, then slowly creeped back up, and now it's at like $850, $900. So I said, well, over a 9-year period, my rent's gone from being $700 a week to $900 per week, which is give or take 30%. Divided by 9, gives us a 3 to 3.5% inflation rate, which is like bang on inflation. But like when my property that I was renting out went from 700 to 650, the poor renter wasn't going, oh, fuck, thanks so much, Jack, for a $50 decrease from what you rented it from last time. But if I increase the rent, it's like, oh, you're an asshole. So it's just life. That's just what it is. Like things that get more expensive over time. It is not a new thing. People just need to learn to live with it. But everyone loves whinging.
Do you think that it's a quote unquote a victim mindset? And do you think that
Of course, yeah.
Do you think someone's spinning the web though on this narrative and benefiting from it?
Yeah, I mean, people spin the web on everything, right? Like it's always being a victim is so much easier than being accountable, right? Because when you're a victim, your problems are someone else's fault. When you're accountable, your problems are your fault. So, I'm someone who is ultra accountable. Everything that happens in my life is my fault. The good, bad, the ugly, the indifferent. And the amazing thing about that is that if everything is my fault, I'm also the solution to every single problem. The issue with being a victim and going, well, the government should have done this and these people should have done that and blah, 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 is that you're giving the power to solve your problems to someone else. And that never ends well for anyone.
I would agree. You're disenfranchising yourself and you're saying that, woe is me, I'm a victim, I can't do anything about it, my hands are bound. If only the world would change, if only the government said powers that be did what they had to do, everything would be okay. You're saying that if you get stuck in that frame, it disenfranchises you to do what you need to do to actually succeed in life anyway.
And no one cares. That's the issue. Like the reality is, regardless of how you were brought up, the current situation you're in, the things that you've been through in your past, all of that stuff, no one actually cares. No one. People think they care, but no one actually cares. So if no one actually cares about all of your problems that you think are the biggest in the world, then why... the thing that I can't get my head around is like, if no one actually cares about your problems more than what you do, why don't you just be the champion of your own life and go and solve your problems? But man, yeah, victims fucking do my head in, like severely. Oh my gosh. And I mean, the good thing about it is the more content I create, which ravels these people, the more views I get, the more engagement I get. And it's like this clear divisive line where you have like victims go to the left and people who are not victims go to the right, and they just like fight each other in my comments. It's the greatest.
You just sit back and enjoy the show.
Literally, I don't even have to comment now. Like someone can comment on one of my posts, Jack, you're a scumbag, fuck you, you're the reason property prices are so expensive. And then like, I don't even have to comment now. Someone else will jump in and be like, fuck you, Jack worked hard, he started when he was young. I'm like, this is the greatest thing ever.
Is that a part of your strategy now?
Yeah, of course. Like, of course. I mean, the stuff that I say, I truly believe.
Yeah.
The way that I say it is the thing that, is divisive. So I was talking to a friend of mine earlier today, and he asked me, I saw the bit of content that blew up where you said if you're not rich, you shouldn't live in Sydney, or you can't live in Sydney. Now, that statement is true. I truly believe that if you are not a wealthy person, Sydney is not a great place to live, because if you live where I grew up in Western Sydney, to drive to the city, it's an hour and a half, 2 hours. Costs $40 each way in tolls, 2 hours of your time every day. How much is that worth? And you have no lifestyle in Western Sydney, right? So I grew up out there, and I moved when I was 21 from Sydney to Newcastle, and all of a sudden I lived by the beach. I had no tolls. It took me 20 to 25 minutes to get to work. I was earning more money now because I was working in the mines, and I had a better lifestyle for less money. And I'm like, why do people not do this? Like, I had these huge aspirations to want to be super wealthy, but I'm like, why do more people not move from where they grow up to live a better life for less money and potentially earn more? So my statement around not being rich and not living in Sydney is very true. Like if you are an average income earner, you can have a way better quality of life in another location and not have all the stresses you have when you live in Sydney or any major city for that reason.
Why is it that you think people feel the need to stay grounded where they grew up and around their family and friends? Because I can understand moving away could seem traumatic for some.
Yeah, it's a belief system, right? Like it's like, oh, I need to be here. My kids are here. My mum and dad are here. My blah, 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 blah. It's like, that's not true. Like that's not true at all. If you were forced to move somewhere, you'd like make it happen, right? But that's like if you asked me before about the victim mentality, and that's the thing that I don't understand. It's like there is a solution to every problem. If it's more expensive to live in Sydney or live in Brisbane or live in whatever city you live in, and it's so, I can't buy a property, it's like that's not society's fault, because the only reason property prices are what they are is because people can afford to pay them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be at that level. So if property prices are at that level, people can afford to pay them, and they're only getting higher, the problem's not going to get better. So if you're not going to either earn more money to be able to afford to live the lifestyle that it costs to live in that city, do you just want to earn the same amount of money? Then you should go and move elsewhere and live a great life in a cheaper location. But then they go, yeah, but Jack, if I go move somewhere else, how am I going to, I can't get a job. Where am I going to earn money? And it's like, that's not even true. It's like, I'm an employer, you're an employer. It is so hard to get good staff who show up, want to work, and want to earn good money. So you'll get a job anywhere you want to go.
I think if you got talent, you'll get a job anywhere.
Yeah, if you're a useless prick, again, it's your own fault. Like, you will not get a job anywhere if you're a useless prick. Doesn't matter if you're in Sydney or in Dubbo.
It doesn't matter, man. No, I agree. It is difficult to find good people, and it's not because of like lack of skill. It's usually mindset, attitude. On that topic, when we talk about the victim mindset, for you, how do you define that? And then why do you think it's more common that someone has one and uncommon that they don't?
So it's more common that people have a victim mindset because more people have victim mindsets. So like it's like there'd be 90% of people in the world. If I went and interviewed 100 people on the street, 90 of those people would be victims and 10 would be not victims. Hence the reason those Vox Pop street things with content do so well, right? Because they just get like all of these, have you seen Coposit ever do those things? Like they do so well because like most people's lives are cooked, and they do these interviews and people are like, what the fuck? And I always react to them and they do so well. But the reason is because there's way more victims than there are not victims. And the thing that I define like the victim mentality is just when people push blame for their own problems onto society or onto other people. Like I said, every problem in my life is my fault. I've created it, whether it's like an external thing or not. You still allow that problem to either happen or exist. And I just love, and that's a learned skill, because like being someone who is accountable is you have to learn how to do that, and you constantly have to catch yourself, right? Where you're like, business is like every day is a different day. Some days you feel like a billionaire and you're killing it, and some days you're like, why the fuck do I do this? But at the end of the day, everything in business is your fault, and you're also the solution for it. And in business, the awesome thing about it is if you go out of business, you go broke or you're no longer in business, no one goes, fuck, man, I'm sorry to hear that. That's no good. They cheer, like, fuck yeah, that guy's gone, you know? That's the victim mentality. I like that tall poppy syndrome. Where if you're doing really well, it's the opposite. They're like, fuck that guy, you know? He's doing well because he's ripping people off, or he's like a scam, or there's always a reason that someone else is doing better than what, the victim is.
Yeah, I find it's like a chasm of disbelief, and they can't surmise from experience how you're doing what you're doing. So they're like, maybe there has to be something nefarious happening for that to take place, because I've worked really hard. I've really tried. I couldn't succeed at it. They're definitely doing something sketchy. Even though they can't prove it with receipts, they just want to throw stones and try to put you in the category of they're a glass house. I'm just going to throw stones.
And even the way that people look at other people that, perceive to have money, for example. And the good thing about me having a level of reach, and I'm sure you see this now with online, is like you get the full sphere of like, if you get 3 or 4 million views on a post, for example, like that's a pretty good sample size of the Australian population, And, if you're capturing 70 or 80% of those people being non-followers, so that are people who don't know really who you are and they're commenting and engaging with your stuff, it gives you a really good understanding of like the mindset of the masses. And you look at comments and when they're saying, oh yeah, it's all right for the rich, or it's all right for like you wealthy people. And it's like, even just that, where they seclude themselves as a poor person or someone who's not rich, and they go like the wealthy or the rich, it's like, they're virtually just saying that I'm never going to be that person and I'm always going to be poor. And again, that's like a trap. They've trapped themselves into being like, I was born this way and this is how it'll always be, and it's me versus them, or us versus them, Instead of reframing it and being like, which is what I did, if that person can do that, I can do that. So how do I do it?
Business owners, if you're stuck using one platform for every project, you're probably stuck in a growth bottleneck. More clients means more hires, which just adds noise and cuts into profits. To break the loop, you need flexible tools that don't stretch your resources. Wix Studio is a smart addition to your business toolkit. Intuitive by design, your team can quickly master the platform and focus on the work that matters the most. Then keep up the momentum with a built-in management tool, a unified dashboard, reusable assets, and a Figma plugin that turns static design into launch-ready websites. With robust native business solutions like bookings, e-commerce, and events, you can take any project at any scale without the added cost of third-party plugins. Plus, Wix Studio is a low-maintenance platform, meaning you can redirect the client budget towards real growth initiatives. Think more value for clients, steady income streams, and stronger relationships. To get started, simply go to wix.com/studio. Do you think it's because people have not had success or they've attempted to and it's not gone well that they just give up and put themselves in a box? Like, what is it that you think really puts people in this situation where they're in an almost defeatist mindset, like it can't be done, the rich are over there, I've always been poor, I have to stay here? It seems like, even though it doesn't feel like it, it's a decision that they've made at some point.
It's definitely a decision. You know, I'm a platinum member of Tony Robbins' like mastermind. You know, that's the first thing that they educate you on, which is like everything in your life is a decision and nothing has meaning until you give it meaning. So like, the reality is nothing actually has meaning. We just give things meaning because we're humans, right? Everything needs to have a meaning. That's why we're always trying to like piece things together in our head. Like, why did he say that? Why did she do that? Why did this happen? And it's like, maybe it just happened because it fucking happened. It's live, you know? It's funny. And I read this incredible book once by a guy by the name of Derek Sivers. I'm not sure if you've ever come across him before. He's like undercover, has no social media, sold a company many years ago for massive money, donated 100% of it to charity. And he wrote this book called Useful, Not True. And it's an incredible book. And it essentially just talks through the beliefs that we walk around in our life with. Every single person has beliefs. And the funny thing is we're not conscious a lot of the time that we walk around in life with what we feel are truths, but are just beliefs. So like we think things are factually true when in reality they're not true. That's just the way that we believe something is. Because in reality, there are only certain things that physics actually proves to be like true. You know, there's only a few things in life which are actually true, like, you know, gravity, for example. Like that's an
maths,
undeniable
physics.
truth. Yeah.
Yeah.
When most things are subjective and it's just a belief, but we walk around in life going like, no, this is the way it is and this is the way it always has to be. When if you ask a different person, the same question, they're often going to have a different answer. So which one is right?
So
Neither
like
of
an
them.
example of that might be, I suck at reading, right? It's a limiting belief. Or I don't have many friends. Like these proclaimed limitations that you kind of enchant on yourself.
Yeah. And you know, if you tell yourself that enough times the same thing over and over again, it just ends up being your truth, right? Where you can sort of reframe that, which is what I constantly try and do. I look at people. We spoke about the 200-mile ultra marathon at the start, and I remember reading David Goggins' book many years ago, his first one, and then I read Never Finished, and he spoke about running this 205-mile run, and I was like, fuck me, like how does someone run 300 plus kilometers? And at the time I was probably running like a half marathon or something. You know, and at that point in time you could be like, oh wow, I'm not that guy. I'm not David Goggins. Or I was like, if that motherfucker can do it, surely I can do it. And then over time you just build to something and then you do it. And all of a sudden now you're the guy that can run a 200-mile run. So that's how, that's how I like to operate and think. And man, I'm constantly working at that stuff.
What are some things that someone can do to start catching themselves with this type of mindset, and how do they start to shift into, you know, more of a victor mindset, you know, conquering and accomplishment versus, you know, I can't do this?
Yeah. So I think, well, the way that I do it is like, because I'm a human, I still have envy and I still get jealous, and, you know, I still try and tell myself the reason someone else is more successful than I am, they've been in business longer than me, or whatever it is, you know, like everyone's got their own little things that they talk to themselves about. And it's just about like being conscious enough to catch yourself and go like, you just been a fucking knob. Like that's not the way it is. If you were to talk out loud and tell other people what you were thinking right now, most people would think you're an idiot.
Yeah. If you read aloud
what
your
you're
thoughts
thinking,
any given moment, it would sound horrendous.
Mine would be so wild. It'd be like, oh, look, there's a cat. Oh, what do you think? It's like, so I think the first thing is like fully acknowledging that you know nothing and that you're starting from like ground zero. Because like you need to accept the fact that you are a nobody and you're starting from nothing when you really are. And then when you've accepted that, then essentially every conversation you go into, every bit of information that you start to consume, you're more curious around it, as opposed to like most Australians, and I'm assuming most people in the world, when they hear something, before they've even been able to like take it in and understand it, they make a decision straight away. Like, oh, that can't work. Oh, that's bullshit. You know? Like, have you ever caught yourself doing that?
Yeah, like the immediate instinctual dismissal of something.
That's right.
Oh, that's stupid. I can never do that. I can never run 300 miles. Like it just seems more reactive than thought out.
Yeah, because it's like your brain is obviously programmed of millions of years to protect you as a human. Like that's what we're programmed to do is be protected by our brains, not to be like curious and explore things, because you know, back in the caveman days, if you explored a lion, they'd fucking maul you to death, and that's not a good thing.
Let me try this plant.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, is just knowing like, okay, I know nothing. I'm starting from zero. The only way is up. And then obviously building off that. And I see it all the time when I have conversations with people, and like the first sign is someone who knows it all. You know, like I know very little, and I'm happy to admit that. I know very little outside of my little niche of property. Like I don't know a lot. And anytime I'm in a conversation when I don't know something and I'm asked a question, I just simply say, fuck do I know? I'm not the guy to ask. And then I also am conscious of the fact that if you compare me to someone like Warren Buffett or to Stephen Schwarzman, who was the founder of Blackstone, for example, from an investment point of view, I'm like this knowledgeable in comparison to those guys. So as an investment expert, am I really an expert, or am I just more intelligent than the average punter and they're really experts? So I think that's like, it's just a self-awareness piece and wanting to not be a useless prick.
That makes sense to me. And I think this like concept around victim mindset is deeper in people than they realize. You know, I work with a lot of people, and you catch it and they're super resistant to it. And even they'll go to the lengths of justifying why they're justifying. So they're so entrenched in it, and it can be hard to shake this stuff. When you're looking at the market, and in Australia in particular with what's happening right now, the rhetoric, the news is price inflation. We're living in a housing crisis, you know, unprecedented numbers, and there's memes and there's culture, and it's in the news, it's on television, it's in media. When you're drowning in this message and this subject matter, what's advice to those people when they're getting entrenched with this? And how can they start to reformat how they see the world when it seems like everyone's going in one certain direction?
So the way that I do it is like, okay, there's a housing crisis. Inflation's out of control. That's a fact. Let's just pretend it's a fact. Now what? Like, what does it do? Let's just assume that's a fact. You are right. There is a housing crisis. Things are way more expensive than what they were. Life is hard.
Step one.
Now what?
Yeah.
What does it solve?
Nothing.
Nothing. Like nothing is solved by saying it. So it's like, okay, that's a fact. Now what can we do about it? The same thing you can do if there's no housing crisis and things aren't too expensive. Like whether you agree or disagree with it, it doesn't actually change anything. It's like, it just is what it is.
So the narrative, whether it's true or not, put it in place and go, cool, so what? Therefore, next.
That's right. So houses are too expensive. What are you going to do about it? Do you want to go buy one of these expensive houses, or do you not? You do. Okay, great. You want to buy an expensive house. Awesome. If you buy an expensive house, do you hope it gets more expensive as time goes on, or less expensive?
More expensive.
Of course, because if it got less expensive, you'd lose money. And you only want things to be less expensive when you're not in the market. So when you get into the market, all of a sudden you have a different mind frame. You're like, property prices are too expensive. We need to be more expensive because you're in, right? So...
do you think that's what's driving inflation, is the people that are in, they seek to benefit from this? So then it's almost like, hear me out here. If I was to play devil's advocate, and if I was looking from the outside in, And some of the conversations I've had with people have been, well, I don't have a parent that can give me the dough to put into the market. I don't have a friend. I don't have someone that can kind of seed me to get in. My parents aren't in. They don't own a house. And there seems to be a divide where it's like, if you're in, you're in. If you're not, you're not. What would you say to that? Because even that in and of itself could be a limiting belief.
It is a limiting belief. Yeah,
a victim mindset.
Of course. Like my parents aren't in. I don't have anyone to give me the deposit to get in. You're just giving the solution to your problem to someone else because you're like, I need help to get into the property market. When the reality is, no, you need to save money. That's what you need to do. That's the actual fact. You need to spend less than you earn, and then what is left over is called savings. And then you put that away for a long enough period of time and you have a deposit. So it's all about priorities. That's the key. I don't know too many young Australians who haven't traveled these days before the age of 30. Whether you do it on a shoestring budget or not, like it costs money.
Oh, yeah.
And like generally when you travel, you also choose not to work for a period of time. Like if you're traveling for longer than say a month or two. So you've made a conscious decision not to work and to value travel and experience over getting into the property market. So in 5 years' time, is it wrong of the property market to be more expensive than it is right now?
No.
Okay.
It makes sense that over time it should seek to increase, especially if more people, if the market is becoming more invested in trying to get in, and that's a growing market.
For sure. So is it the market's fault that you can't get in and it's more expensive, or is it your fault for choosing not to get in when it was less expensive?
I would say it's my fault.
Cool. And if people don't say that's my fault, again, that's okay, but what does it solve?
Nothing.
Nothing. So like, and the other thing that people can't conceptualize is that if I use the example of Sydney, people go, yeah, but when my parents bought in Sydney, they bought a house for 5,000 or 20,000 or 1,000 or 100,000, whatever the number is, doesn't actually matter. And it's like, yeah, they did. Absolutely, they did. And our population was probably 10 million, not 27 million, or it could have been 15 million, not 27 million. There was way more land in Sydney than there is right now. There was a smaller population. There was less wealth. There was less condensed or saturated form of wealth, right? Like lots of wealthy people now live in Sydney, which attracts more and more wealthy people. So yeah, absolutely it was. It was cheaper and it was probably, I wouldn't say easier at the point in time because when they got into the market, that was just the normality. It was still hard. Like you ask any parent, it's like, it was never easy, right? Interest rates were high, repayments were still there. It was never like, fuck me, let's go buy 10 properties. This is easy. So now it's just a different time. So that's why I use this example of like when you're born in America today, do you get born and go, I can't believe I can't afford to buy an apartment in New York? Of course you don't, because there's just this belief and common understanding that New York is an expensive place where rich people live.
Correct.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's how Sydney's going to be. Like whether you like it or not, that's just how it's going to be. So when you're born in Australia, I believe in 50 years' time, it's not going to be normal to go, hey, I want to go buy a house in Sydney or in Brisbane or in Melbourne, because that is where the rich people are going to live.
Yeah, and I think it's like you look at the historical data and you go, well, my parents could have. And you're saying that, well, now you can't.
Yeah, but that's just like saying, well, back in the Roman ages, when you got given land, you were given 1 million acres or whatever the fuck it was. It's like, of course, but we're not in the Roman ages anymore, right? And it's like, people never used to live in apartments and now they do. And people never used to be able to go on the internet and now they do. And there was never the ability for punters like me to have a voice and go on a podcast and now they do. So it's just the world.
Things change, and that's one thing you can guarantee in life is that everything's going to continuously change.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, if we take the Sydney game and let's just say we hypothesize that the system is rigged against us. Let's say there is a divide of wealth and that the wealth...
When you say us, who's us?
So let's play a game metaphorically here.
Yep.
Let's assume that I have a victim mindset and I'm looking at the Sydney market and I would say that, okay, there's the wealth class, there's the middle class, and then there's the,
poor people.
the poor people. And I'm in that class.
Okay, so when you say us, you mean us poors.
Us poor people, let's presume, and I'll play that role. And if you think about it, let's just say the notion might be, I want to buy a house in Sydney for my family.
Yep.
And let's just say it's 1.5 million. I would then need a $300,000 deposit, which would mean I'd need to earn $500,000 to spend the $300,000, which would mean I'd have to earn and save $50,000 a year for maybe 10 years.
And then this $1.5 million property is going to be $3 million.
Exactly, right? So in that predicament, let's just say that's the challenge, the David versus Goliath moment that they're facing. What's your advice to someone in that situation of like, how can they start to play the game?
I would say, hi, Mr. and Mrs., you can't afford to live in Sydney. That's what I'd say. Because if you could afford it, it wouldn't take you 10 years to go and save for a deposit based on your incomes. And I would say it's probably not a great idea to go and buy a house in Sydney, because even when you do buy it, then what happens is you're tied to a mortgage for 30 years that takes up 70 to 80% of your disposable income, which means you're going to feel very poor. You're going to have a house in Sydney, but you're going to have a house in Sydney and be poor. You won't be able to leave it.
So instead of depleting 30% of my income household-wise,
70%.
It's now 70%.
Yeah,
because
that's right.
I'm trying to over-index on something I shouldn't have.
Yeah, well, you're gonna go buy a house. You're going to have to pay your mortgage repayments. You're going to have to all the costs that come with owning a house, like council rates, repairs and maintenance. Everyone wants to renovate. Everyone wants a new kitchen. Blah 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 blah. And that's what 90% of people do. That's why 90% of people are poor. Even if they own a house, most people spend minimum 60 to 70% of their net income on their mortgage. Then they have to live with the rest. So I believe that most people shouldn't live the life that they do. And I'm like a big rent vesting advocate, right? So
what's rent vesting real quick?
Which is just like renting where you live and then investing elsewhere.
Okay.
And then here's what the us say, which is the poor people. Why would I pay someone else's mortgage for? I want to live in my own home. I want to feel secure in my own home. What about my kids' security? I've never been kicked out of a rental in my life. I never feel not secure. I walk in my front door and it feels just like I own the home. Except guess what? I don't have a $10 million mortgage on the house. And if I lost my job or my business went bad and I couldn't afford to pay my rent, which is 1/5 of what it would cost that person to own the property, I go to my property manager, I give them the keys and I say, keep my bond, I'm out of here. And I go get something cheaper. Go and buy a $10 million house, the GFC happens, market comes off by 20%, try and sell that thing. Very hard. So it's like a different way of thinking, right? If you want to live in your own house and you want to be secure, then guess what? You have to act your wage. So you have to go live somewhere that you can afford to live. And that's probably not where your parents grew up or even close to it. Maybe in a different location completely, could be in a different state. But again, whether you like it or you don't like it, you have two options. One, conform and go and live where you want to live. Or two, be the solution. Go earn more money so you can live where your parents live.
It's almost like saying, well, I want to get paid a CEO's wage. I've never been a CEO, but I want to now get paid like one. That's the equivalent of buying a house that maybe I'm not yet in the class to try and go and buy.
But people think they're in the class because they're delusional, right? Like people are delusional because they believe they are entitled because their parents did it and their parents' parents did it. So why can't I do it? It's like this entitlement.
Would you say it's an entitlement issue more than anything else?
I think it's an entitlement issue which all comes from being a victim, right? Because if you're a victim, you're an entitled person. That's what I believe. So, it's just like you've got to move with the times. And whether people agree or disagree with me, again, okay, that's fine. Now what? Nothing changes. It's like whatever I'm saying, it doesn't actually matter.
No, I like where you're going. And let's just say, okay, we shift gears for a moment. And let's say someone goes, okay, cool, I got to act at my level, right? Like if I'm playing a video game, I can't just jump to the end boss and start fighting the end boss. I haven't got the gear or the experience, or I'm not ready for that. Yeah. So then if someone's not yet in the position and you're talking about rent vesting, it's like, cool, okay, like let's just say this, I can rent a really nice house for 30% of my income, not 80%, have that surplus income and then take what that surplus is and potentially invest it elsewhere another town. Would you say it's better for someone to get their first property through not living in it than it is to, buy to live?
So I believe that as a first home buyer, you should try and take advantage of all the first home buyer incentives that are out there in the market. The 5% deposits, the no lender's mortgage insurance, the no stamp duty, because as soon as you buy one property, you are no longer a first home buyer and you will never get access to those things ever again. Now, you should, based on policy, live in your first home. depends on what state you're in and all the rest of it, but let's just assume you have to live in the property. You can also rent out bedrooms, for example, which may be possible if you're young and don't have a family, and may not be possible if you're a little bit older and you have a family. So there's no right or wrong. It's going to be right or wrong for each individual person and their own circumstances. But like, you'd be mad not to take advantage of the first home buyer incentives because it just makes it way easier to get into the marketplace. But again, you think about it like, okay, I'm going to use this property for 12 months as my home that I live in. Then I'm going to move out of it, rent it out, and go and live where I want to live. So it's like 12 months of maybe sacrifice, or I wouldn't even call it sacrifice. I would just say it's 12 months of a slightly different living circumstance than maybe what you're in right now. Like when I first moved out of home, I moved into a share house in Cooks Hill where there was 5 other people. I was paying $220 a week for my room. It was fucking awesome. But I was a single guy. I had a girlfriend at the time, actually, so I wasn't single. But we loved it. We lived with other people. We were young. Like, it was fun. We're partying on the weekends and all that jazz. And at like $220 a week, it's like split between 2 people as well. It was nothing. But would I do that with 2 kids and a dog and a cat? Probably not, right? It's less desirable. So yeah, and again, the earlier you do it, the better it is.
Yeah.
So like if you choose, again, like I was saying, to travel and do other stuff, that's fine. But just know that the other stuff, like property, is going to get harder. Just like if you buy a property first and have mortgage and repayments, traveling then gets harder, right? Because when you go traveling for 4 months, you don't have no commitments. Now you got to pay a mortgage, you got to pay all the bills, and you got to travel. So it's like priorities.
Yo, my name's Dane Walker and I am disgustingly obsessed with branding. I had to figure out a way to do branding every single day, so I branded myself. Then I started my agency, Rival. And hired a team of branding mavericks hell-bent on creating brands so good that they'll make your competition shit their pants. So here's the thing, you want your brand to go viral and Rival makes brands go viral. That's why we're offering you a free 30-minute branding session to get an expert's opinion. If you don't believe me, the proof is in the pudding. Here's what clients have to say about Rival.
Rival is trusted by brands like Nutrition Warehouse, Light My Bricks, and Vumi.
So if you want to absolutely smoke the competition and make your brand go viral, hit the link below and book in your free 30-minute branding session. Now, let's assume that someone wants to get in the game seriously. They want to build capital, they want to build wealth. You know, the zeitgeist is that if you just didn't eat smashed avocado and drink coffees every day, you would have the money to buy a house. Is wealth creation more than that?
Yeah, so there's a few pieces, I believe, to wealth creation. The first thing is it's a mindset. It's definitely a mindset. Like anything, right? Like when you get into business, all of a sudden your life just becomes your business. Like you would know this. It's like every moment you're thinking about something to do with your business, whether it's an issue, whether you want to grow, whether you want to learn something new, you want to venture into a new territory, whatever it is, like you're always thinking, you're always researching, and wealth creation is exactly the same. So you need to have the mindset for it, and it needs to be something that you're committed to, not just because it's sexy right now, like let's buy some Bitcoin and hopefully it doubles and we make heaps of cash. Like it's legitimately something you have to do for a long period of time. And like just know that regardless of how much you earn, whether it's $60,000 a year or $600,000 a year, there's a level of sacrifice that needs to happen because your current living environment, if you're spending everything you earn, there's nothing left to invest. So if you earn 600 and spend 600, or you earn 60 and spend 60, is actually exactly the same. You live a slightly different lifestyle, but it's exactly the same situation because there's zero left at the end. So you need to reframe how you live, how much you want to have left over, how much you can start investing. And again, like I start running a 5K run before I run a 330K run, you start saving $100 a week or $500 a week, whatever it is, before you get to the big leagues.
You would say it's about necessarily removing things first before you start adding things?
Yeah, well, the more simple your life is, and the less friction and complexity you have to it from a financial point of view, the easier. And I'll give you an example. I started this thing where I was earning $75,000 a year. I don't know if you've ever seen the bits of content.
No.
Off the back of this cost of living crisis shit. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go find how much I earned when I bought my first property. So I got my mum. She went through and she found my group certificate from 2015. I earned $75,000 that year. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this experiment where I pretend that I'm earning 75 grand a year again. naturally my fixed expenses that I can't get rid of, like all my mortgage repayments and all the stuff that I have with my business and stuff doesn't go, but I live on 75 grand a year. I pay my $220 a week that I was paying for my share house. I found a few rooms in Paddington that I could rent, or I would rent if I was in that situation again. I had an allowance for groceries and I had whatever it was left over. And I'm pretty sure I could save about $1,000 a fortnight. Now I was living lean on that, but I could do it. And I was like, okay, if I do this for 12 months, I'd have 25 grand or thereabouts, and that'd be enough for a deposit on a $500,000 property. Now, when I had no commitments, that's so easy. But now what I found challenging is that because I am so busy in my life and I'm traveling and I'm constantly entertaining clients and I'm doing stuff, like that experience been really hard for me because I have a very complex life now from what it was when I bought my first property. I didn't have, I went to work, I went home, that was it. I went to the gym. So the earlier you do things that, like, I've just discovered that with the experiment, which is like the earlier you do things in your life, before you have kids, before you have, a separation in your relationship that you're now going to pay child support for, or all that shit that happens in life to most people, the easier it is.
Now, let's imagine someone's in that situation where they have a couple kids, they're in their maybe mid-30s. They're going, okay, cool. I want to create some kind of security or stability. I know a lot of people in Sydney that have unfortunately been kicked out of a bunch of houses. They're over it. They want to create some kind of level of security for their family. If someone were to look at their life, you're saying that if they could just scrutinize their spending, they could find some way to save cash. And that's the first stage.
Yes. I'm also conscious that when you have kids and you're in your mid-30s, it's harder.
Yeah.
But again, you put yourself in that situation, no one else.
That was your choice.
That's right.
You can't blame anyone else.
You decided to have kids and you decided to end up in that situation. Some people had other forces that pushed them there. Lots of people didn't. So you've just got to start from where you are. So I did a video on this the other day. A guy asked me a question. Hey, Jack, I'm a FIFO worker. I've got 3 kids. I've got a wife that doesn't work. I've got child support that I pay to another child that I have with another woman. I got a house that I live in and I want to invest, but the bank won't lend me any money. And I was like, great, that's your situation. I can't change that. But this is what you can do. You can go, this is okay. I am here. What can I do? So it's like, well, what does my superannuation look like? How much super have I got? What can I do with that? That's an option. How much can I save, for example? Well, how long is it going to take me to save for a house? If it's way too hard to save for a house, what else can I invest in on a regular basis to grow my wealth? Like, there is always an option. You just have to accept that. And then there's all these first home, like there's a new first home buyer scheme, which is potentially coming out depending on who gets in power around being able to access up to $50,000 from your superannuation to then use as a deposit for your property, which I think would be super advantageous because lots of people have been working, like that example of mid-30s. They probably have, 100 grand, 150 grand inside of their super. They're not going to be able to touch it until they get to 60 anyway. So if they remove 50 grand today and they go buy a house with it, it's probably there's a lot more utility in that than keeping money in their super, which they're going to access when they're old and wrinkly anyway. So I think it's just accepting where you're at, accepting that it's your fault and no one else's that you're in that position. And it's also your now responsibility to work with what you have.
What are some of the biggest lies that people tell themselves about how they can't save to buy a home?
Some of the biggest lies people tell themselves about is they pay for convenience over everything. People constantly pay for convenience, like Uber Eats, for example. That's convenience. People pay for that. Netflix and all this shit. Like, these sound like little things, but it's like the habit of just, oh yeah, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. People think that, or they have this, I think, limiting. So I wouldn't say it's a belief, but it's like they can't think that if I do this for 1 year, it's not going to be my life forever. So like just having 1 year of like average life, doing less than what you usually do, finding fun and other things that are more affordable, potentially moving back home with your parents if you can, for example. Like my brother and his wife now, they moved back home. So they were planning to have kids and they were like, we want to buy a house before we have kids. Like otherwise we know once we have kids, very, very hard. So they moved, like they swallowed their pride. They've been moved out of home for 7 or 8 years. So and again, not everyone has the ability to do this, but they did. So they moved back home with mum and dad. Mum and dad give them no handouts, but they saved their money living at home with mum and dad, in your late 20s, early 30s, after not living at home for a long period of time.
Yeah, it sounds rough.
Yeah. So like people have this lie that they tell themselves is like, it's just too hard. When it's like, if you just look at, hey, I got to do this for 12 months or 24 months and actually commit to it, like life is long. Yeah. We live for 85 years now, like as average life expectancy. So 2 of those 85 years is not so bad to be sacrificing.
I would agree with that. And I think it's just looking at a way to do it. And rather than just creating a roadblock for yourself and saying, can't be done, it's not possible, I'm going to buy into the narrative. You're saying challenge it and find a way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And then the other thing is like on that, I spoke about that co-posit. Like I did a React video where they interviewed all these people in their 60s and their 70s and their 80s. And it's like, hey, how old are you? How much do you have in savings? You know, and they're like, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 5 million. There was this one guy who had $5,000. He was like 80. And I was like, I just thought it was so fascinating because it's like, there's like 10 80-year-olds, say, like 8 of those 10 80-year-olds have, X amount of millions, which is say like that's what the average 80-year-old. And then there's like one guy who has 50 grand and there's one guy who has 5. And it's like the difference between all those 10 people like is not the property prices were different when each of them were younger because they were all the same age. And it's like, it's not that they grew up in a different era because they all grew up in the same era. It's like, that is just the greatest example of different life choices, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like same age, that super ad where they do this. It's like same age, same super contributions. These people chose choices that led to wherever they are, and this guy chose choices that led to $5,000 in the bank and probably on the pension at 80. And
I would agree with that. And it's those life choices that, when compounded, make the biggest difference in the end. And there's a great book I read about this called The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. He's like, if you eat a giant cheeseburger every day for 30 days, it'll compound into bad health. Or if you go and exercise every day for 30 days, it'll compound into good health. When you think about the compound effect and you think about the little things that stack together like you're talking about, you can make at least a stride in the right direction and create a nest egg or some kind of capital to invest. Let's take it to another gear, and let's say someone's like, I genuinely want to build wealth. I want to not just save, I want to really hit this thing. What is it that someone needs to start thinking about to get themselves out of, I guess, the monotony of mediocrity in everyday life and into wealth creation?
So the way that I personally do it is you've got to have someone, for me, I've got to have someone that I'm aspiring to be or I'm chasing. Like you need to ideally follow a leader because going down a path that someone else has already gone down or many people have gone down is much easier because you're learning from other people, which is exactly what I've done. I had a mentor when I was young. I followed him. I exceeded his portfolio as I should have because he never had he never had a him, for example, when he was growing his portfolio and his wealth. And then you've got to find that next person. So I think that's really key is like find someone who's been there and done it or is on the path that you want to travel. And emulate everything that they're doing and sort of morph it into your own. But I think the reality of wealth creation, a lot of people say they want a certain level of wealth, but then when they're actually in the reality of it, it's very, very different, right? Because, and I found myself, having to check myself multiple times. I constantly publicly say I want to have a multi-billion-dollar international company. I truly believe that. But when you then go through the daily struggles of having a company that does $25 million a year, and you're like, fuck me dead. I'm like 2.5% of the way there. And I got to like put up with these issues, right? It's like to say it is much easier than doing it. And that's why I love ultra marathon running because it's like, I want to run a 200-mile run. I can say that to you right now. Go and do it.
Yeah.
Very different. Saying it, easy. Doing it, very hard. Like 20 plus times during that race, I would have said, I want to give up. I'm over this, too hard, my legs hurt, this is fucked, there's a snake, I'm over this, and David Goggins talks about those 1 second decisions. Like you don't lose the fight by one big decision. It's like every time your brain tells you, it's that 1 second is saying, no, fuck, I'm continuing. And wealth creation is exactly the same. So like people look at me and go, oh, you got a $40 million property portfolio. That's amazing. You got the cars and all the property and all the rest of it, which is like, yeah, there are definitely amazing moments, but I still have a life. And like when rates go from 2% to 6%, when you've got $100,000 or $1 million worth of debt or $20 million worth of debt, looks a bit different, right? Or when your business gets hammered in the media, for example, and you lose all of your profit and you're in the negative, that's not exciting. That's not fun. The amount of stress that one person has to go through And remember, like when you get to a certain level, that's your baseline, right? So like we look at a billionaire like, oh wow, they're a billionaire, but they're a billionaire, and they don't look at themselves any differently to how we look at ourselves because they're at that baseline. So it's not as exciting as you think it may be.
It really isn't. And I think when you actually take the time to read the biographies of, someone like Elon or Bezos, you understand that these people aren't doing normal levels of activity. They're doing crazy hours over a long duration for sometimes a decade. No one knows their name. They're sleeping on the basement floor of their building or in the gym like Alex Hormozy, and they're throwing every dime and hour they have into their enterprises. And it's now 2 decades in that you're like, wow, look at this person.
Yeah, and even though they're that far in and they're worth that much money, the reality is it can still all go away. That's the crazy thing, right? So back to the question around wealth creation, it's like it's often not as exciting as you think it's going to be.
It really isn't.
Yeah, it's just becomes monotonous life. You feel poorer before you feel richer. Like especially when you're buying property, because every time you get a bit of equity, you reinvest that into another property, you get more debt, your cash flow is worse than what it was before you bought that next property. On paper, you look richer, but in reality, you feel poorer. But you're just praying for one day that to pay off. And you feel wealthier at that point in time, but a lot of people never make it there as well. So it's something you need to be like fully committed to. And that's why I said it's like a mindset, right? Because it just becomes your life.
Let's imagine that the majority of the viewers are somehow involved in business or aspiring to do so. And they're investing their time, their energy, their resources into what it is that they're creating for their business.
Yeah.
How important is goal setting for when it comes to the financial strategy behind getting into property?
I think it's key. I also think there's a fine line between, pulling capital out of your business too early to go buy a property. Like I'm probably a bit of a culprit of doing this, like I'm obsessed with real estate and I'm always looking at new deals and all the rest of it. And, my business generates really good money and I probably use a lot of it to go buy more real estate where, you don't want to starve your business of oxygen as well at the same token. So it's like this balancing act. But the cool thing about real estate is like when you get into real estate, you can generally just use the equity from that real estate to go buy more and your actual capital can stay in your business. It's just the servicing element of paying the mortgages every month or the gap between whatever the rent covers and what your repayments and expenses are. But again, it's like a long-term thing. Just like your business that you're in it constantly, real estate's a long-term game as well. And they both go very much hand in hand. So like with business, for example, obviously a lot of people have exited out of businesses and I have lots of friends who have made a lot of money exiting out of businesses, but that actually doesn't excite me at all. Like if I compare someone who exited out of a business for whatever they exited out for, 100 million, 200 million, 500 million bucks, versus someone who's been in the business and continuing to build the business until they're 80 or 90 years old, I'd much rather be the person who continues to bet it all, grow the business forever versus exiting out and pulling money off the table. And they're two obviously different things, like you're optimizing for different things. But the thing that I notice with people who exit out of business, and I've never done it obviously, I'm just talking about what I perceive, is they pull some money off the table, they go buy a nice house and they buy some cars and all the rest of it, and then 12 months later they get bored. And they're like, oh, now I've got to get back into business again. And then they're starting from scratch. But if you look at all the people who are on the rich list and have been there for many, many, many years, whether it's the US, Australia, their businesses are tried and tested and have been around for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And that's the reason they've had the ability to compound into the many, many, many billions. So someone like Harry Triguboff, for example, that's the kind of business that I want to build and the portfolio that I want to build, where it's like I'm not optimizing for short term. I'm optimizing like, what does this look like when I'm 80 or 90 years old? That's the cool thing.
Do you find that they feed each other? Like if I have a business and I have a portfolio, can I optimize both because I have two different assets that I'm building essentially?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, your business generally is cash flow. So like the bigger it gets, I'm in a service-based business as are you, and there's not a lot of capital expenditure required to grow the businesses. It's just like people. That's what you need. So they generally are really profitable and they generally generate a lot of cash flow. And the real estate generates your capital. So you use your cash flow to get into capital things and then they compound over time. And then like you can use real estate to fund things in property. So I'm going through acquiring businesses now, like property management businesses to generate more reoccurring revenue for our company. And the only reason I'm able to do that is because I've got a real estate portfolio that I can leverage off to be able to buy these things. If not, I would have to have huge cash deposits to go and buy these other businesses. So yeah, absolutely. They go hand in hand because any lender will securitize against real estate. It's like the safest thing to securitize against. So if you own it, it's a good thing.
No, I even like noticed that like banks will, we talked about this recently on another podcast with Lachlan Cameron, is that there's kind of like, from the bank's perspective, two types of citizens, those that own property, those that don't.
Yeah.
And they tend to favor those that do own assets.
For sure, because it's like safe security, right? If like something goes wrong, they've got security over a real estate asset, which doesn't fluctuate a great deal in value. Minimum they've got is 20% equity in that because they generally don't lend you more than 80% of the value. So like they're covered, right? They're safe. That's the good thing. So it makes everything easy. You want lines of credit for your business. Maximum most lenders will give you is $250 of unsecured debt. Anything above that needs to be secured, usually by real estate. So yeah, it's a good thing.
So if someone wanted to follow suit and do what you're doing, what resources, programs, or habits did you try to build into your mindset at the very beginning?
So the thing that I did from the very beginning was I realized that I knew nothing. So I started from that like student mindset. Okay, I know nothing. Let's go and learn. And it's hard to conceptualize for most people, but like every waking hour that I could, I had a podcast on, or I was listening to an audio book, or I was, speaking to someone about it. Because I was just obsessed. I wanted to make cash and I needed to learn to be able to do that. And that's the thing. Like you need to be obsessive over things. Like just like you're obsessive, like if you are doing something exciting in your life, like buying a new car, for example, like when you're buying a new car, you're obsessed at like all the options out there, right? You're buying a ute. You're like, let's look at the BT50. Let's look at the Triton. Let's look at the Hilux. Let's compare them all. Let's test drive them. Let's watch all the reviews on YouTube to see which ones have got the best. Like it's that mentality, but not for 30 seconds, for years. And that's what I had. Like we spoke about, you went to a seminar in Brisbane for Gary Vee and that. And I was like, oh, I went to the same one in Sydney. And like I went to 20, 30, 40 of those things, all for different things, whether it was personal development, whether it was real estate investing, whether it was, completely different stuff. It was just that immersive mindset that you need to have to learn as much as you possibly can. But then there comes a point in time where you go from learning to actually needing to execute on what you've learned. So you need to learn, and then when you are confident enough to take action, use your learnings to go and then implement. And then you learn the real world, not just like this fallacy of like listening to a podcast like this and going, oh yeah, that sounds easy. Like when you get into the game, then you really learn. It's like, oh, I didn't know this, or this happened, or, I didn't know about this thing or this pitfall or whatever it was. So that's the key, is like it's all education. And then once you're as educated as you need to be, it's then the execution piece off the back of it. And the best thing about education now is like, you don't need to go buy a $5,000 or a $10,000 course. Like you can, there's no doubt about it. And you may learn faster, but there is so much free information out there on the internet. Like there is so many YouTube videos. There is so many free courses or audio. Like you subscribe to Spotify now for $10 a month and you get like every audiobook in the world. Crazy.
Yeah, which is crazy. I just realized this like a week ago. People are DMing me, hey man, I'm listening to your book for free on Spotify. I was like, oh, dope. I didn't even know that they could do that. So
yeah, so
that makes me excited that people can access resources at a fraction
for like
of the
next
cost.
to nothing, right?
Yeah.
It's like a book used to be $50, $60, $70 depending on the book, where now it's like $10 a month and you get every book in the world in your pocket. So that's the key, is education and then execution and then the vicious cycle of do something, learn, change, do more, learn, change, do more. Yeah, that's the key.
Now let's talk about leverage. When it comes to people's perception around debt, I remember reading Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and Cash Flow Quadrant, where he said that there's a concept around good debt and bad debt. Could you just unpack like how someone can weaponize or leverage debt in favor of wealth building? Because it doesn't sound like it should belong together. It doesn't sound like accumulating debt means wealth.
Yeah.
How does that work?
So essentially, like the most simple definition of good debt, bad debt. Good debt is debt that is generally tied to assets that appreciate in value over time. And in Australia, generally the interest on that debt becomes tax deductible because it's for an investment. Whereas bad debt is generally debt tied to depreciating assets, things like cars, boats, bikes, all that shit, credit cards, And the interest on that debt is non-tax deductible, which means you pay for it with after-tax income. That's the most straightforward way to think about it. So we want minimal to no bad debt and lots of good debt, ideally. Now, even though you are getting good debt, debt is still dangerous if it's over-leveraged and not used correctly. So there is still a level of danger to it. I mean, it does build wealth, but if you over-leverage and you can't afford to own or to pay the debt, bad things can happen. So we can't be naive about that. But again, when you are starting out and buying your first property, maybe, it's not like you're going from $0 to $50 million in debt overnight, right? Like you start, you get your first piece of real estate, you start to get your first bit of rental income, which helps with the repayments, and then you get comfortable with it like I did. And then you go, okay, this isn't too bad. I've still got X amount of dollars left over at the end of the month and I could probably afford to potentially buy some more real estate. And then you buy your second piece of real estate and all of a sudden you start to get this compounding effect. But the incredible thing about debt is essentially you're just using other people's money, being most of the time the banks, to buy assets that you own 100% of, and you're getting 100% of the outcome of as well. So let's say that you go borrow $1 million from, or say 900,000 from the bank. You have 100,000 in cash, you borrow 900,000 from the bank, and you go buy a $1 million piece of real estate. Now what's happening is you're getting growth, and let's assume that you get 7% growth, which is about the Australian average, on $1 million piece of real estate. So you're making 70 grand a year in capital growth. Not every year, but over a long period of time, when you average it out, that's what you're making. But you only put in 100 grand. So when you make 70 grand in growth per annum on a $100,000 investment, that's a 70% return on your equity, because now you're getting growth on a much larger asset base than you actually have the capital to, or the cash to be able to go and invest in. Now, obviously you have expenses and you have things that come out of that, out of the cash flow. But essentially the way that I think about it is, what has my asset grown by that year? What does it cost me to own? And just run it like a P&L. Even though with P&L, it's like income in, expenses out. With property, it's like capital growth versus expenses out. And that's your P&L. And it's, if you use leverage correctly, that is why huge companies in the world, some of the ASX biggest 200 companies in Australia, or the S&P 500 biggest 500 companies in the US, have huge levels of debt on their balance sheet. And that's because they use other people's money to grow versus their own cash. And they'll leave your own cash liquid and use it for other stuff.
I think the whole dynamic is interesting because there's two beliefs I really like to live by. One, which is when Jim Rohn was talking about, I guess, mindset and wealth creation. He was saying that, he tried to live by this concept of, isn't that interesting? So when you try to attach yourself to these stories where you're like, man, this person gets to inherit an $8 million house, they haven't really worked for it. His response, that 1 second knee-jerk response, is like, isn't that interesting? Moving on.
Yeah.
And it's like Tony Robbins says, where focus goes, energy flows. If you're focusing on the problem, all your energy is going toward the frustrating elements attached to the problem. If you're moving your energy toward the solution, then at least your energy is in that direction. If you're going to point the fire hose at something, don't point it at the problem, point it at the solution.
Yeah, and I also think the other interesting thing, and I have this, again, it's a belief, which is growing up with no money is actually better than growing up with money. And again, people won't agree with that. But the reason I say that is because I've seen both sides. I've seen people who grow up with money, ultra successful families, they've got lots of cash, they've never struggled, they've always had everything. But then they get out into the real world and they have to make something for themselves, right? Like, as human beings, we crave meaning, we want to create our own thing. And because they had the silver spoon growing up throughout their life, it's very hard because you weren't taught the struggle. You weren't taught how to go and make things for yourself because you always had someone looking after them. And then you see these other people, like the wealthiest people in the world generally started from zero. Very, very rarely do you see a really wealthy person or a wealthy family has created more than the generation before. Very rarely. I spoke about it before, like James Packer, for example, like prime example. I think that family's incredible and like what they've created is incredible, but like who was more impressive, Kerry or James?
Kerry.
Of course.
100%.
And it's like, imagine living underneath that, right? And that's an extreme example, but there's lots of levels to that. Kids went to the private school, they got their first car bought for them, they got to travel on their mum and dad's money, but then one day that changes and they're now in the real world. They get into a workplace where no one knows who their family is. And they go and apply for a loan at the bank and no one gives a shit who your family is. And like all of this stuff where it's like, it actually may make one little thing easier, which is money problems. Like obviously you've got your parents to fall back on if something happens, for example, but it makes all other areas of your life significantly harder.
Why is it that growing up poor gives something to people that grow up wealthy don't?
Well, because again, most people live in this life of the middle. So their life isn't really good and it's not really bad, but it just is what it is, right? And you see it all the time. It's in relationships, it's with your health, it's with your financial well-being. It's like when you live in the middle, which is where most people live, it's never bad enough to make change and it's never good enough to like, you're never like super ecstatic. You just live in this like mellow, it is what it is life.
Would you say that that's the most dangerous place to be?
100%. Because you see it like, I'll give you an example. My girlfriend had breast cancer year before last. Before that, never thought about her health. Like naturally had an incredible body, was a dancer, all this stuff. One day your life changes. You're like, hey, you've got breast cancer. It's severe. You need chemotherapy. You need a surgery. And you think the worst. Is this the end of my life? How quickly do you reckon she changed her health? Immediately. Because all of a sudden it's like you have a choice. You either live or you die, right? So when you're forced into change, things happen immediately. Go through a divorce. Fat slob, never looked after yourself during the relationship. We're never
back
intimate.
on the market.
All of a sudden.
Game time.
Let's go. I need to look good. I need to train. I need to be social again. Money, it's the same, right? You asked about the poor thing. And it's like, well, when you live in the middle, you never really struggled, which then taught you that you never really need to chase for anything. You just sort of live in this, balanced. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's shit. Well, like when you're poor, that is the driver. It's like my life's really bad. Like you hear about the stories where people didn't know if they were going to eat dinner every night, or they didn't know about, or whether they were going to have a roof over their head, whatever it is. It's like when it's really bad, you're forced into change, and that's your driver. So I think that's why it's bad to sometimes have it really bad, because that's the driver. On the other side of that, sometimes you can also say, well, that's the reason my life ended up like this. Like, have you heard that story around the two brothers that grew up with the alcoholic father? Have you heard this? So essentially two brothers grew up, alcoholic father, went through life, the dad passed away, and one of them became an alcoholic and, virtually threw his life down the drain, and the other one grew up to be an ultra successful person, never drank alcohol, ultra health conscious and grew an incredible business. And they were both asked, like, how did you end up like this? And they both had the same answer. Well, how could I end up anywhere else? My dad was an alcoholic. So exactly the same upbringing, but they use the reason to go down each path, right? So that's the thing with anything, right? Like being poor, you can go, oh, well, of course I'm going to end up poor because my parents were poor. But it's like, at the same token, how many people were started poor, and you ask them, why are you so successful? And they go, well, I was poor. I never wanted to be like that again. Yeah. Mindset. Yeah.
Nothing puts people on a slingshot trajectory like enough pain.
It's true. Like, and when you're often forced into it. So I was asked a closing question of a podcast recently. They're like, if you had one piece of advice for someone, blah, 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 what would it be? I'm like, hopefully something really shit happens in your life really soon, because that'll force you into momentum. And it's true.
I would agree. I think some of the shittest moments in my life were the moments I gained clarity through poetically a part of myself dying. And what I mean by this, and I was sharing this with someone recently, they said, how are you going? I was like, dude, it's been a tremendously interesting 12 months where there's so much happening all at the same time. It's a maelstrom of like success and amazing things happening simultaneously to a maelstrom of like a lot of challenges happening. Not that it's like bad holistically. It's just like really intense, high volumes of stress, but like a part of you really weirdly kind of dies and another part of you is superseding that past self. And it's like this concept that in nature, you either adapt or die. You take a lion, you put it in a different ecosystem, it has a choice. I either adapt to this new food system and like learn how to fend for myself, or I die in this new ecosystem. And what I'm trying to get at with this is like that these moments of pain are the reason I'm seeking new solutions to problems I've never thought about before. And those new solutions are compounding and creating momentum unlike I've ever experienced before. And it's true because if you don't have enough pain maybe there's a part of your life that requires that in order to get moving. If you were to look at business like a jungle, like how would you unpack that? Like, what do you mean by that?
If I was to look at business like a jungle, it's a really good question. You're either the one that's on the hunt and you're out there hunting shit like a fucking great white shark, or you're the one being hunted, right? You're like the great white shark that's being hunted by the orcas. And that can change in an instant. So like you need to always be a fucking killer, because as soon as you like are not, there's that next young person or older person who all of a sudden has made the decision to go, it's my time. Like something happened in their life that created pain, so now they're a killer. And as soon as you take your foot off the pedal, or, you know, you try and like smell the roses and you lose focus, you know, all of a sudden shit breaks and you're nervous and worried again. Like recently in our business, as an example, we switched over some invoicing with Meta. So instead of getting a card charged daily, we did it to monthly invoicing. Got to the end of the month, bang, let's pay the invoice. Had a look. Oh, you can't pay it with Amex anymore. It's an international transfer and it needs to be done to Meta Ireland. This is a long way to tell a story, but anyway. So we got to the end of the month and we couldn't pay the invoice. So then we had to do international money transfers. There was a $50,000 limit. We spent a few $100,000 a month on Meta. So it was like our ads were down for a few weeks. All of a sudden we had no ads. We had obviously lower lead volume. Then a few other things happened. And now 2 months on, we're feeling the effects of something that happened back then because of me just being comfortable, not looking at something, or my account team not looking at something, and that caused issues. So not being on the ball, not being focused. And little things like that happen all of the time in business, right? Like, oh, I'm too fucking tired to do that podcast. We'll do it next week. Or like, not doing that client call, or pushing something off because you're comfortable. You got cash in the bank. You're not at that start of the business where like every dollar counts and you're like chasing, hustling. And it's like the jungle, right? Like you're the lion that's fucking hunting shit down, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm not that hungry anymore. I might just chill. And then when you're chilling, there's a motherfucker who's hungry and he's going to eat your ass. You know?
Yeah.
It's true, right?
It's going to happen.
Like the lion thinks that he's the king of the jungle until the rhino comes and fucking charges him with his horn and like pierces the guy's fucking heart. You know? Or like something goes for a drink at the water hole and the hippo fucking grabs it and breaks its back.
Yeah.
That's what happens in life.
Nature is metal, man. And I think business is metal, dude.
You always want to be fucking there and make sure you watch the hippo and the rhino.
Well, the higher I fly in business, the more ruthless people become. And I'm not talking about like losing their ethics, but they're sharper. They've got their battle scars. They've seen some shit. Like they've been in the jungle a long time, and they're like, I know what it takes to survive out here.
They're like
man.
a lion with one eye that's been in heaps of fights.
I feel like the higher you shoot in business, the more you start to realize that, man, the jungle is rough, and like it's not this stiff, stale corporate environment. People are out to eat each other's lunch, and
Everyone wants to be the king, right?
So what made you come to the conclusion that you're like, I'm going to produce media and I'm going to do it consistently and I'm going to do it at scale?
Yeah, so I did it at the start. I was still doing it at that point in time, but I wasn't like as all in as I am right now. And the other thing that happened is previous to getting bad publicity, I was more conscious of how I was perceived. So I used to be the guy who had the suit on and the fucking turtleneck, and I thought I was the hot shit. And like I would watch bits of content that I'd recorded and I wouldn't post them because I would be worried about how people would perceive me. And then you get slandered in the media and like everyone's like, you're a fuckwit. And then I'm like, if everyone thinks I'm a fuckwit, I may as well be a fuckwit. So it allowed me to produce more content where I was just myself.
You're like, thanks for the branding.
Yeah.
I'll lean into that.
And like a lot of people steer away when they get bad media. And like now I'm just like, is what it is. So what?
It reminds me of that scene in 8 Mile where he's like, I'll take your power away by owning up to the fact of everything you're trying to put on me.
Yeah, that's right. So that was the thing. It changed. I was like, I'm just going to be myself. I'm going to talk about whatever I want, whether people like it or dislike it, because you know what? I don't give a fuck. Yeah.
Now, you say content creation is a business weapon. Why are most business owners too scared to start investing in themselves, creating media to build their businesses?
I think there's a few reasons. And I'll just talk about my own experience. It's like you go, oh, well, what have I got authority to talk about? you know, because you're like, well, I haven't really done all that much. My business isn't very big. I'm a 1 or 2 man band. Like, what can I talk about? And what Gary Vaynerchuk taught me from all the years of consuming his content was just like, the whole idea is you don't have to be the expert. You don't have to be the guy who's done 20 years in business and built this thing. It's just like, you can be the guy who's documenting you building a business and sharing your experiences and your perceptions and all that type of stuff. So I think people, they get stuck of like, oh, what am I going to create today? Or what am I going to say? When what they could do is just be like, hey, this is me and I'm building my business. This is day 2 and it's fucking shit. That's a bit of content, you know? Done. So that's what people get stuck on, is like they try and create as opposed to document. Most people are not good in front of a camera, and neither was I until I did it 10,000 times. You know, I know you get cameras out and people get really nervous.
Yeah.
You know, they're like, and it's like it's no different to the camera not being here. You just talk. But it's just this like mental block.
I think it's this moment of like confrontation because you're like, oh, okay, this is being captured and it changes your entire demeanor, your dialect, your body posture. It just freaks people out because they start. It's like when you look in a mirror in the morning, you're like, oh shit, I gotta do my hair, I gotta brush my teeth, and I gotta deal with this all day. This is what other people see. But I think the camera thing, it's the only way to really deal with it is by immersing yourself in doing it.
It's repetitions, right? It's like anything. So that's a big one, is like people get stuck with the camera. They aren't naturally good. So like they'll do a bit of content, it'll be shit, it won't get any engagement. They get, like less motivated, and then they stop doing it because they never allow themselves to get good enough to start getting a lot of views. And then, I think a lot of people aren't very self-confident. There's a lot of stuff, right?
Well, a big one here is like people are consistently afraid of what others will think of them.
Yeah, that's right.
And now in your particular case, people have thrown some pretty awful things your way. Would you say that your most hated pieces of content are equally the highest performing?
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah. The ones with many, many millions of views are the ones where, I talk about things that are divisive to people, or the way that they think. So yeah, like all that stuff off the SBS where I actually didn't think it was that divisive. And I just literally said that I don't vote. And the reason I don't vote is because it's a waste of my time and the lines are long and it takes me 2 hours to vote and it costs $50 and my time's worth $5,000 an hour. So I'm actually costing myself $9,950 by voting because I only get a $50 fine. and like I can have more impact on my own life than any politician ever will. So why would I vote? And like whether you agree with that or disagree, it doesn't change my life. But it was a controversial thing that people were like, privileged young white boy. So it was interesting.
Now, when it comes to you building this $1 billion business that you're in pursuit of, when this is all said and done from a business perspective, how do you want to be remembered?
I don't care. I don't care, honestly. I'm going to be dead. Who gives a fuck? I seriously think that.
Okay.
I don't understand people in like a legacy. And it's like, you're fucking dead. Who cares? While I'm alive, I want people to think Jack Henderson is Jack Henderson, and that's who he is. When I'm gone, however people think about me, I don't give a shit. As long as I lived an incredible life, I was authentic to myself. I did what I wanted to do, and I was a kind person to people who were kind to me. Then that's all that matters.
Yeah. What's a quote or a mantra that you've carried with you on this journey that you wish that you could impart into others?
Lots of them at different points in time when they've been important. It's not really a quote or a mantra, but like the thing around, like I just said, I want to create $1 billion company, right? Like it's easy to say that, but then when you're tested, do you really want to build $1 billion company? So like that's the mantra, just constantly reminding yourself of like, do you really want it? Because like you're constantly being tested, right? Whether it's physically or mentally in life, it's like you're constantly being pushed. And I believe in this thing that like life happens for you, not to you. So everything that's happening in life is for the greater good. Yeah, but it's just interesting, like when you get tested, having that mindset of like 2 options here. Like go the hard route, which is always the right way, or go the easy route, which is generally not the right way. And that's how I've been thinking about things for the last 3, 4, 5 years. It's just, do you actually want what you say you want?
I think many people think that reality kicks in and then you start to realize this is way harder than I thought.
Of course.
And I've had those moments where you're like, do I really want this? And people around you are questioning everything you're doing. You're questioning yourself, what you're doing. Constantly. And there's this weird itch where you're like, I want to do it anyway. And that for me is a hard thing to describe. Like, why is that there? You know?
Yeah. And then, you know, sometimes I go to sleep, a depressed little boy, and I'm like, fuck this thing. I'm so over it. And then you wake up, you've had 8 hours of sleep, and you're like, what the fuck was I ever thinking? Let's go. You know? So you're always one good sleep away from from getting back on the path.
Yeah. Do you have any other beliefs that help you stay focused, that help you, I guess, really collect your thoughts and stay on the path that you're trying to build?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a thing that needs to be intrinsically in you as well. You know, like there's something that can't really be taught, if that makes sense. So there needs to be like that deep desire, and I don't know where that shit comes from. It's like upbringing and all that jazz. An element of it is mindset.
Do you genuinely believe that this can't be fostered? People either have it or they don't.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they're not born with the level of intensity or whatever it is that they have. Like as they grow as a human and as they grow in their role, or, you know, as anyone grows, I think like you grow into it even more. You become more of a savage. You become more of that person. But yeah, there's definitely something that's like in people that you meet people and you're like, motherfucker, you got some demons. And that either grows them or it disables them. But if you embrace that shit, it's crazy. And everyone has their own demons, right? It doesn't mean you have to have this killer upbringing, like, and you know, have to have all these really bad things that have happened to you. It's like, it could be little things where like, I know, like when I always felt inadequate at school, I never got the hot girls. Like I was always like Mr. Average, and you know, like I used to get bullied every now and then. And it's like all those little things that compound that make you feel like this level of inadequacy. You're not enough. And then that's what creates this little thing like, I'll fucking show you. Yeah, but eventually that may go away because you're like, oh, it doesn't drive me anymore. I've showed myself and I've showed those people. And then sometimes that thing just continues to drive you and it's never enough, right? And there's that saying, strive, and never arrive. So it's like that balance of like using that to continue to drive you, but then also understanding that you need to enjoy your life as well.
Well said. Dude, you're absolutely killing it. It's been a blast watching your content. It's been really fun watching you troll people.
Thank you, bro. I appreciate it.
This episode is brought to you by Wix Studio.